Data Storytellers, new episode on the podcast. I have a podcasting veteran with me today. Even though it was a different type of podcast, I'm sure we'll talk about it. Today we'll talk about AI and data leadership, and it's a pleasure to have Eric Gonzalez on the podcast. Eric, welcome on the show.
Laz, thank you for having me.
So Eric, we'll have a lot to talk about. We kind of mapped out in advance some key topics, but we'll venture wherever we're called during the discussion. But how about we just dive in? You had a LinkedIn post which said that all the vibe coding that we're seeing, albeit seems impressive on the surface. I don't even know if you said that, but the punchline was that it creates an insane amount of tech debt. So can you elaborate on that? What made you actually post that?
Just working every day and seeing that people are still running entire enterprises on Excel. I mean, it's impressive how much is created, but the same thing happened in the dot-com bubble. Everybody and their mother created a website, said that the web was going to revolutionize the world, and it did, just like AI is and will. But with everything that is developed, 90 to 95% of it is probably junk. And so there are a lot of people who are creating a lot of innovative things. There are a lot of people who are just creating things. And those two things are not mutually exclusive, but they also are not tightly coupled. And so if people get very excited, AI is the first tech revolution that we have had where you don't need to be technical in order to get a response or to get something that comes back. If you had AI, you needed to have data scientists or ML ops or ML engineer to develop it. If it was data engineering back in the past, then obviously you needed to have people who are good at building pipelines and orchestration. If it was like MS-DOS back in the day, you needed to have people who understood that language, or COBOL. Like every single innovation that has happened from the advent of computers to now, you've needed some technical acumen or technical prowess to get something back. But now with Replit, or one of those similar apps that are low code, no code, people can just type things in, it creates it, they publish it out there, and you can build rapidly and innovate rapidly. But are you going and adopting best coding practices? Are you preventing potential SQL injections or other cyber attacks on the surface? Are you putting all of your organizational data into something that is not monitored, or something that you could potentially expose your proprietary secrets to? So from an enterprise grade solution to just building something and, seeing a cool app developed, there's a large gap and a large chasm between those two. And that's really the story of the innovation behind that, or the inspiration behind that post.
So you said that since the advent of computers, and as you said that, I just started to kind of pressure test the idea that even if we go back to the Industrial Revolution, even there you needed, let's say, capital and engineers to actually build something, right? Like a steam engine. So it was huge, but it's still there. It wasn't democratized like today. And this democratization, I think that's the buzzword of the day, because it's not just with AI, but even what we're doing right now. Distribution channels, content, it is democratized, meaning that anyone can do it, right? If you have, for the podcasting, if you have a microphone, like a basic setup, you can basically record, and then you can post it on Spotify and see where it takes you. So this is the first time in history that we have something like this, and I don't think we're prepared for it, which is, by the way, not even a bad thing, because it is what it is. We'll see how it goes. But this is the first time where there's not much needed to enter into the conversation and build something. So if you look at companies today and the different AI narratives in the boardrooms, right? So you have the solution providers, the vendors selling the dreams to the C-suite, right? From your perspective, like, how do you go into a room full of executives who are super pumped about AI and they are pouring money and attention into this? What kind of octave do you hit? What kind of message do you bring to not be a naysayer who's pumping the brakes and sucking the excitement out of the room, but at the same time be an educator while you're still inspiring them to experiment? Like, how do you resolve that tension?
Yeah. Well, if I'm speaking to anybody, my first question is, do you understand what happened in the business yesterday? Because if you don't know what happened yesterday, how are you going to predict or prescribe tomorrow? So if I went and asked you, give me your top line revenue over the last 3 months, and you can't get that answer to me with the yesterday's date minus 3 months within the next 24 hours on a batch process that you already have figured out, you're probably not ready for AI. And it's not because you need to have your data fully mapped out in order to get there. But if we, let's say in the perfect world, we built a AI agent that we can deploy within our environment. It's going around and it's the perfect chatbot, or it's the perfect, you could put a robot in a warehouse, whatever it is. How do I know that that actually had business impact? How do I know that that substantially increased revenue or avoided cost to a point that profitability shot up? You wouldn't be able to run an experiment or a test based off of the thing that you created in order to dictate whether or not the ROI was tangibly there from the product that you produced or from the thing that you produced. And so that is usually my initial messaging, or my initial question is, do we understand what is happening in the business today? Do we understand how to monitor and manage what is happening today? And if we do, great. Now we can go to the next step and start thinking about how we can put AI into the environment. Now, the question from there becomes, well, what are the boring, rote, monotonous processes that the business is doing today that would be enabled by AI or really automation? Because technology, you reference the Industrial Revolution, whether it was the Industrial Revolution, something as simple as the tractor, or like the glucometer for doctors, or the computer, obviously, for the world, it cannibalized those boring, rote, monotonous things for people, or things that were very slow. So you have the steam engine. Now we don't need horse-drawn carriages to bring items around, or for shipping. You have email replacing mail. Now I don't need to wait 3-4 days to get a message across to somebody. I can just shoot that in through the computer. So there is, throughout history, a plethora of examples of tech cannibalizing the boring things first. How does that apply with AI today? If you go into a boardroom or you go in to speak with executives, the number one thing that they'll talk about is chatbots. Or one company that I spoke with was doing for like denial mail letters, not actually denial, but like denial mail letters for a healthcare payer. Like usually say or explain, here is why your thing was denied. It was insufficient in terms of the documentation from the provider. Here's the procedure code that you had sent in for getting this claim approved. Here's the reason why it will not be paid out, or why it will only be partially paid out, et cetera. It used to be data entry people doing that, or typing in the mailers and then actually putting it and stuffing it in a folder, whatever, pressing that, putting it in the mail, shipping it out to individuals. That's something that you can easily replace people, or replace a large function of somebody's workload with people, and then send that out. So it's first getting at, how do we understand the impact that these things can have? And do we have the basic understanding of the business today? And then secondarily, how do we think about automation, and how do we think about augmentation and automation of certain processes so that we can free up resource time, but also protect the business? Like there's a lot of memes out there where it's like a Jenga puzzle that it's talking about like all the stuff of the business, and then at the bottom it's like one little piece, and it's like the person who knows that one line of code. That's how a lot of businesses' processes are run. So if you can augment or replace that aspect of the business so that you're not over-reliant on one team or one individual, and you can automate that piece, now there's not a one-to-one fixed cost to scale, and now there's not this cog that if you remove it, your business might suffer for 3-6 months without even really understanding why.
So it's funny that you mentioned this healthcare example, because just yesterday I spoke with a C-level executive at a big healthcare company. He actually listens to the podcast too. He's one of those guys who listens to every episode. So shout out to him, and I'm not going to name him, but he was talking about how now both the providers are the insurance companies themselves, they are writing up the emails of why they are denying someone's claims, but then also the emails are being sent back with responses of why the person should actually receive the treatment and the cover. So it's funny how now basically on both sides of the conversation, people are equipped with AI, and AI is just doing that job. Now, it's interesting though that if you think about it, AI is really good at that. AI is, it does fail on so many levels that we're just finding out about. If you use ChatGPT or Claude on a daily basis for your work or for your personal stuff, you probably bumped into some of those pitfalls, right? I still remember one of the first times when I was still dazzled by, wow, these LLMs, they are insane. And my wife was pregnant at the time, I think with our second child. And I asked some question about the timelines. And I spotted that it made a mistake that probably a first grade a student with basic math wouldn't have. And that was like a big moment. It's like, hey, this thing can basically write like Shakespeare if I tell it to in a very compelling, convincing way, but it will, fail third grade math shamelessly. So, but there are things that AI is really, really good at. Like, for example, detecting patterns, like all this stuff, we can actually dump it on AI, and it does a better job than we would imagine it could. Now, when we talk about AI, the AI bubble, which we're definitely in, is just how the market works when there's something huge being rolled out like AI. So where do you think some of these disappointments and corrections will come from mainly when people realize that, oh, wait a second, AI won't actually be able to do this thing? There are elements of this where, what the AI that we've been talking about since the 80s, what we've been actually talking about was AGI. What people meant when they said AI, they meant AGI. People just don't know that AGI is a thing. I didn't know what AGI was until, lately. But it's artificial general intelligence that we meant by AI. But now there's something that looks and feels like that thing, but it's not AGI. It's large language models, which are amazing, but they are probabilistic systems, not deterministic systems, as just one of the reasons why often we are disappointed in what they can do. Where do you think these main corrections will come from when we hit the limits of what LLMs specifically can do?
It's a good question. I want to address one thing that you said because I find it very interesting, which is the payer-provider standpoint of having basically the battle of the bots in terms of whether or not something gets approved or denied. And the collateral damage is going to be the member or the person who has the insurance at that point. So if you imagine maybe two different companies coding both sides, or even the same company coding both sides, it's like, hey, I need to go in for surgery. I need a pre-authorization. So that's what's sent in from the provider. Then the payer is going to say, you sent me insufficient documentation, so I needed these three things. And then the payer side, or the provider side, or maybe a rev cycle management company that is working on behalf of the provider side is going to message back and say, okay, here are the records, or here are the things that I included for you. Or maybe it gives that pre-filled like ad lib, if you will, for the provider to put in all the contextual information for the patient, and then it sends to the payer, here's all of the relevant information based off of what I know so that this gets approved. And then it's just a continuous improvement system over time. So I think to start, it would be collateral damage is the member in this instance who's trying to receive those services. But over time, the hope is that both systems on the provider and payer side get so good that only genuine procedures that should be done or should be taken care of, because you have something that is a great diagnostic tool that can be used in conjunction with a radiologist or x-rays that somebody takes or an MRI that somebody takes to say like, yes, there definitely is a tear in this person's shoulder cuff, so I need to perform surgery, so I shouldn't be doing physical therapy, which is a ridiculous prerequisite for me to do for this level 4 or grade 4 tear. So I think that should result in less like fraud or waste or abuse of the healthcare system in general. But I also think that we are a long way away from that, because if there's anything I've learned from healthcare, these industries that do have like, they're large enterprise companies that just have a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape in terms of practices. It's very hard to move the needle, and it's very hard to drive change. And that is one of the biggest issues as we get to the AI bubble, is you have a lot of companies that are banking on this becoming an enterprise grade tool or enterprise grade system. And they're going to be stuck in POC purgatory because either from regulatory pressure, we cannot implement this because it doesn't meet regulatory or compliance standards, or from just people saying this is not a problem that I want to deal with, so I'm going to stall it as much as possible. And then it's going to be 3, 4, 5 years before something is actually deployed or actually implemented. And then you spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for something to just go by the wayside. But I think that the biggest bubble of AI, at least in the short term, is going to be LLMs, meaning you don't want something that has such a large corpus of information that you have to hit against or use tokens against in order to deploy at scale across an entire organization or corporation. Because how long are these companies going to run at a deficit? How long is this going to be pumped up through investment or through venture capital in terms of being able to operate or run at a loss, to not to answer how many R's there are in strawberry or to say thank you? Like, there are some ridiculous things that people do with it and ridiculous things that do cost money. And, people do a whole breakdown of why asking 3 R's in strawberry is actually only $50 and it's not that bad or whatever it is. But when you multiply that by billions of people or billions of tasks that are done every day, that does add up over time. And so I think the shift rather than the bubble will be towards more small language models or more specialized models. And you see like agent-to-agent frameworks or model context protocol frameworks coming out now, where it is more about the communication of a high-level reasoning agent or agent-to-agent communication. And if you think about the like anthropomorphization of AI and you think about the brain, your frontal cortex is not also seeing for you. You have your occipital lobe, which is seeing. So if you're driving a car, you're seeing the information is coming through the back of your brain that is shooting signals to your frontal cortex so that you can make decisions in terms of like being able to move or being able to operate your motor function. And then if you're trying to do like speech comprehension or language comprehension, then that's going to be on the temporal, on the left side of your brain. So like all of that is not your entire brain on at once, because that would be overloading your brain. So having something that can rather use different aspects or different specialized models will be more impactful than having something that just is trillions of parameters and continues to need to grow and increase without either an architectural shift, so like compressing the actual model training parameters into something that is more easily trainable, or something that can consume significantly less energy. Or obviously we have quantum computing around the corner, people talking about nuclear energy. Like, you need to have some other framework or some other source to be able to train these models, because it's too capital and computationally expensive in order for you to consistently do that at scale over time.
So there's a lot to unpack there. So one is that, so essentially with these models, okay, there's the energy consumption issue, which I think that's the one that is probably the most straightforward to solve, because there are solutions out there. Of course, there are regulatory issues or environmental issues and all that, but I think if enough money goes into it, it will be solved. And there are many, many options for that. Plus, even the models themselves, they tend to get optimized over time. So let's just say that the energy consumption is not an issue. At the same time, if you want to improve model output, you need to train it on larger and larger and larger sets of data, right? And we pretty much already reached the amount of data that is available for these models to make big gains and big improvements on what they can do today. So we would actually need to generate way, way, way more human-generated data to make those improvements. But at the same time, AI itself is generating AI-generated content and flooding the internet with that, which is basically kind of like junk food for AI, and it destroys it, right? So can you talk a little bit about model collapse in that, and how do you see that of basically AI consuming AI-generated content results in the output's accuracy or validity falling off a cliff over time?
Well, it's, if you think about like fraud detection at banks or cancer screening for humans. Those are things that you never want to happen. But if you took a entire corpus of information from every single human that has ever existed or every single bank transaction that has ever happened, it would be like a pin needle in a football field of haystack. So like if you give a bunch of junk food, as you referenced, in terms of like all of this data that is synthetic, that has not actually happened, yeah, maybe you're overloading the system in terms of like the chance possibility that something happens. Maybe there is something that can say, oh, I've seen this before. But what happens after that is just a simulation at that point. So if you are relying on highly synthetic data and there is no ground truth data, then you're basically saying the hallucinations of these machines is better than ground truth data that has happened in real life. And that is something that I think is a dangerous game to play, because if you as an organization or as an enterprise are selling that or touting that as our models are trained off of 80% synthetic data and we have been able to predict the future, like if you really were able to do that effectively, then yeah, nobody would need any other model. Humans wouldn't need to exist. That would just be it. But obviously humans are messy. We make random decisions. If you think about self-driving cars, I think the main reason why they haven't completely taken off is because humans are still on the road. And I'm not by any means advocating for humans not to be on the road, but you probably need to have, like in the same way that there are fire lanes or emergency lanes or taxi lanes, you would need to have a like self-driving lane, because there is just such an uncertainty coupled to humans that the error rate on models that were trained on only synthetic data, I just don't see that being something that is fruitful for the world at large. You mentioned something else, though, that I also want to touch on, which is models have been trained on so much data already, and they already are able to make such big decisions based off of that data. That's publicly available data. And by publicly, I mean like anything that is published to the web that somebody could get access to. So if somebody put something on Instagram or Reddit and they're like, I don't want AI to copy this, like you've put it out into the world, somebody has probably trained their model based off of your information. Talking more about like an organizational enterprise level, that is all going to be behind a wall. And a lot of them, if they adopt anything into their enterprise, it will be applying the transformer architecture of these AI models, adopting that within their organization, then using their own corpus of information to hit against that model and potentially retrain it, but within their environment, but not expose that information back out to train the model so that they can make that more powerful and then use that as part of their product offering to other organizations or to other businesses. So there's still a lot that has not been uncovered or discovered that has tangible real world application. And I think that's why when you think about the FANG or whatever the acronym is of big tech companies today, their moat around AI is not the fact that they have amazing researchers or are paying $100 million buyouts for people to go join. It's because they have years and years and years of billions of people's data. And if you have topped out as an organization that doesn't have insight or the ability to tap in to those organizations, you can build something novel, you can build something useful, but you are not going to have the same information capability as Google or Alphabet or as Meta or as Amazon or any of these companies that have such rich and diverse information about so many segments of the world, of your different patterns of behavior. And so that's really where I see the main value coming from. And that's a little bit scary if you think about those companies as well, because they could probably just go out and acquire either all of the talent or all of the small companies in order to just boost up their platforms, which already have all of that consumer information.
Yeah. So, and that's super interesting also on the enterprise level. So I just had a podcast with Nurtekin Savas, who's the head of credit infrastructure and data and AI over at PayPal. And one of the things that he was talking about is the advent of AI specialization, and that's where the main gains will come from, 100%. Now, there's also like a bigger conversation around AI. So if you think about the meta level, and anyone who talks about that, I mean, there's no particular authority. Everyone is, uninformed because, we just don't know what's going to happen. But it's interesting to explore the possibilities. So we think about AI, and right now, like why the hype is so strong is because from our perspective, AI has been accelerating at an insane rate, right? So since ChatGPT happened, that's where the public consciousness was basically introduced to LLMs. Since then, it's everywhere, and it can do insane things. If we look at video generation, at the same time, I think like those improvements that we're seeing, they tend to be like flatlining on many levels. One is the data availability, but also I think what you said about humans are messy. So a lot of the innovation when humans innovate happens because of that messiness and that genuine randomness. And sometimes we do things that just don't make sense, right? And that's how a lot of times we invent new things. And there is this kind of chaos in which new things emerge. Well, with AI, I think because we're looking at an LLM, and you can see even on LinkedIn, like some of these ridiculous posts about, I was talking to ChatGPT and I'm telling you it's a sentient being and all that. Well, if you know how the thing works, you know that it's just really good at looking and sounding and smelling like a human because it's just an amazing mimicking machine. But then I think just as a collective, as a society, because it looks like a human, it smells like a human, it sounds like a human, I think we also project our own ambitions into it. So when you hear about, super intelligence taking over the world and these like war game scenarios that you can watch, all of them kind of assume that AI thinks like us. But the thing is that we built AI and we know how AI thinks mostly. So there's still like a black box element to LLMs where we don't know exactly what's happening and why. But in general, we still built it. We don't know how we think those. You talked about, for example, how we process information and the different parts of the brain are responsible for different types of processing. We have our the old brain, the core brain, lizard brain, however you want to call it. And then we have kind of our midbrain, and then we have our prefrontal cortex and all that. So at the same time, when we talk about the brain, a lot of people forget, I forget when I talk about the brain, that we only know like 5% of it. Still, like we have still a very rudimentary understanding. We understand neurotransmitters and all that on a high level, but we still don't understand why we think like we think or how the human brain can perform at a level it can perform. So I'm just kind of saying that when we think about the growth of AI and where it can go and what it can do, I think there's still like a deep disconnect between what LLMs are and then what we think they are. And I'm not even saying that people who are not AI engineers, right? I think just we're kind of in this fever dream right now, and it's just super interesting to see how it will play out. What you said about, in businesses, how they will be stuck in POC purgatory for, 3 years. Like, what do you think that can be done today about that? Like, how do you think that this can be prevented in certain businesses? How can you turn that around? How can you illuminate the relevant decision maker so that they don't fall into that trap?
I think it's the same conversation for any technology. Like, you need to get back to first principles and think, how is this going to impact the business? You cannot just be attracted by the shiny object syndrome and fall into the trap of saying, oh, this is new technology, it's fun, it's novel. You talked about the all of these different systems or AI bots. The best thing, and I don't know who developed it, but the probably product-led growth people or the marketers, when ChatGPT and these other softwares have it write back to you or act like it's thinking or do all these human elements while you're watching it, you fall into that like, ooh, it's alive, it's really there, and it feels like you're communicating with something. Even if you're building an app, you go into Replit, you start typing in, build this for me. It's like, wait, I'm processing. Here are the steps that I'm doing. You type something into Perplexity. It's saying, here's what I need to do first. And it gives you that chain of thought. And then it produces the result after the fact. So it's doing human-like things instead of, if you think of Google before all of this, Google, you type in where are the top 10 plus best places to eat, and it just snaps in front of your face, and you have the list in front of you. There's no human element there. You don't feel like, hey, I'm with Google right now, or I'm with Gemini right now. You're just like, oh, I Googled it, and this is it. It's changing the context of technology from a verb to a noun. It's becoming, oh, I Googled it. Oh, I Ubered somewhere, to, oh, I'm speaking with ChatGPT. I am communicating with Claude. I am building alongside Replit. So it's completely changing that paradigm of people interacting with and working with these things, which I think is absolutely by design. And if it's not, somebody's subconscious completely tapped into that themselves, and they're like, this really is making me feel good, and this is why we should do it this way for people. So it's when you're meeting with businesses or stakeholders or whoever it is that's trying to deploy one of these things, it's like, we can do a lot with this for sure. We can deploy an autonomous agent to look at our code and provide documentation. We can have something like the example we talked about earlier, do basically battle between payer and provider in terms of claim denials and the information there. We can have something that can sit on top of our repository of all of the information within our organization and give us good metadata tagging, or give us a good understanding of, if we type in something like a HR agent, give me the benefit information. I need to know the FMLA policy so that when I'm taking leave for my pregnancy, I can figure out how much paid leave I can take, and it, connects to all of those systems. But whenever you go to that place, the second question you need to ask is, how long is it going to take to get there? And how much money are we going to have to invest to do that? And what would that enable us to do? So what's the business impact? What's the feasibility, and how much is it going to cost? And if you have those conversations and you can figure out, hey, this has high business impact, and with a narrow use case, we can implement it with very little cost. And then from there, we can start to build some quick wins within the organization so that we can start to invest more in terms of being able to deploy more AI. That's the type of conversation, or at least the framework that businesses should operate in, instead of getting seduced by a good salesperson with a great pitch that comes in and says, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and look what we've done with other organizations. Then you throw it on top of your tech stack, or you throw it on top of your data, and you're like, why isn't this working for me? And then you realize, oh, it's because my data haven't even been figured out for a data visualization tool, let alone AI. So it really needs to start with those smaller, narrower, more digestible use cases. Like, if you were not ready 5-10 years ago for this, you should not be building right now for it.
Yeah, that is a good soundbite too. And how did you come to these conclusions? So can you just tell me a little bit about how you even stumbled into the world of data? What was your entry point?
The stumble point for the world of data was the first job I had. I finished my degree with neuroscience and economics from the University of Miami. I got a job at a rev cycle management company in Chicago as a business intelligence analyst, and we were doing SQL dumps into Excel. I thought there's got to be a better way than doing this, because it was doing it for like 30 plus clients each quarter. And it was there that I discovered Power BI had just come out. I automated my role, and then somebody on my team left and I took over their role, and it was just automating it by putting SQL into Power BI, creating the reports within there, and then having a macro that ran on the PowerPoint so that we could just clean it up and get it into the format that we needed to send that out to all of the clients. And instead of being limited to 120 clients, now we can do any, because it was an 11-second refresh every single time we wanted to do that. And so that was like my first taste of data. And then I went to go into healthcare consulting, because I was little fish, big pond at my first role. And then I went to a boutique company to wear more hats. And it was there that I grew from individual contributor to people leader, started doing business development, starting to do staffing and recruiting, and leading larger scale migrations or implementations. And I realized, I like healthcare. I feel like I'm good at it, but I love data. And so I started a master's program at Georgia Tech. And I'll get into the master's piece in a minute, because I think it fits with what you're talking about before. But when I started that master's program, I recruited to another firm that was industry agnostic, but still very data focused. And so there I had the opportunity to work across a variety of industries. And I did that intentionally, because in my mind, I was already seeing it from client to client just within a healthcare context, but I was like, wherever you go, everybody's trying to do the same thing. They're trying to get better. They're trying to get faster. They're trying to leverage information. It's, call data information or information data. It's the same thing, but they're trying to leverage information to improve operations. And by doing that, they will do one of three things. They will either increase their revenue, they will decrease their expenses, or they will avoid costs. If you do one of those three things, you will improve profitability. So because of thinking of it that way, I was like, well, financial services is probably doing it differently. Had the opportunity to work in financial services, worked for an accounting company, worked for a university, worked for an agriculture company. So I got more experience in different industries, which gave me a more rich understanding of data at large. And then I could apply that to wherever I wanted to work or whatever I wanted to do. And for AI specifically, it was a perfect time for me to start the master's program because I started in 2020 at Georgia Tech. The master's was in computational data analytics, and I graduated in 2022. ChatGPT was released in 2021. So it was like the perfect storm of it not being readily available for me to, like all these other kids that are probably doing it today, use it to code everything for them and not really understand the fundamental principles of what I was doing. And I took it with the intention of, I want to understand the fundamentals from a technical level, not to be heads down, hands on keyboard. But when I'm meeting with a technical person, I can speak their language, I can help them debug, I can do a high level architectural design, but I understand the business processes that need to be solved and the tech platforms or the algorithms that need to power that. While at the same time, I like having conversations like this. My wife will come home and she works in a hospital and she tells me about some issue that she's facing. And I'm already thinking about, well, for the scheduling department, this is what we could do. We could apply an optimization algorithm here. And we could think about scheduling. And she's just like, I just wanted to talk about the problems we were facing at the hospital. So I just enjoy having that designs first thinking and first principles thinking. But I was also fortunate that I took one Python course on Udemy and I was like, yes, I'm a genius. I'm going to build a robot tomorrow. And then I got a master's and I was like, I know nothing. And so that is where I think a lot of the world is I'm a genius. I'm going to build a robot. And then it's all going to come crashing down because when it starts getting into production and you start putting human in the loop, I saw something interesting and I forget who posted it, but it was like once you solve for one dependency, you just run into the next dependency. So you think that it's going to be done because you've solved for that one thing, but then you immediately run into the next roadblock. And then you fix that one and you run into the next roadblock. And that is how most organizations have been structured. They've built this tech debt over time. They've continued to kick the can on a lot of things. And there are organizations that I've worked with and I still have worked with today that run operations on COBOL or have parts of their systems on COBOL and mainframes. And that is because consistently over time, people have made decisions like, hey, this is functional, it's working, we don't need to change it, we don't need to fix it. But that language has fallen off a lot. And there are some small like boutique companies that are starting to either do some migrations or maintenance because a lot of the workforce has fallen out of that. But if that is at scale and you had people try to migrate from an Oracle SQL database to like PostgreSQL database, or you have people that go from a SQL data warehouse into a data lake back to a SQL data warehouse, you have all these lift and shifts and migrations and things and it's not like people are going, I'm going to optimize everything I've built in the past to then upgrade. And then once I'm in there, I'll continuously improve and migrate again while optimizing everything. It's like the analogy I use is you were single and you lived in an apartment. You had some things, you collected it, but it was mostly like you knew where everything was. And then you maybe moved in with someone, got a roommate, or you moved in with your partner. You guys move into a little bit bigger house, a starter home. You each bring in your own things. You start to put stuff in the garage. You have a closet or two that is just kind of like your storage closet. And then you're like, oh, we're having kids now. We're going to move into a bigger house. And so you move into the bigger house and then you just have more rooms to put things in and more places to shove things and maybe a bigger garage, or now you have a shed, or maybe you have a storage locker because there's some things some mementos that you don't want to get rid of. And then it's the end of your life and you're like, all right, I'm going to pass on all this stuff to my kids. And then your kids go into the house and they're like, what in the world have they been storing for all of these years? And that is what a lot of organizations do with their data. It's just shoved into all these different pockets and corners until somebody who's never been in that organization before starts to poke around and they're like, what happened here? Why is this running this way? What is this process? And so the best AI is not going to be able to understand that entire mess or be able to clean it up effectively and run and manage the business at the same time. You almost need like a pause to be able to do a successful unraveling, migration, and optimization. But that's just one part of it. Like if you clean up the house, the other element's keeping the house clean. Have you put in the guardrails? Have you put in the things to make sure that you can maintain that new status quo? Because if not, it's just going to happen immediately again.
Absolutely. And with you, so what do you do now? What are you busy with on a day-to-day?
What am I busy with on a day-to-day? Well, I have a 1.5-year-old and we have another one on the way. So that definitely keeps me busy. But
when will the second one arrive?
She will be here October 6th or before.
So you will have 2 under 2.
Yes.
You're in for a treat because I have a 5-month-old and then my daughter will be 2 just next month, right? Oh. Yeah. So, but I can tell you, and there are always when I'm speaking with the members of the Data Storytellers community, most of them, if not all of them, are actually parents, interestingly enough. So it's always, let's say, 10% parenting catch up and then 90% data and enterprise AI. And the consensus seems to be that going from 0 to 1 is the toughest part of it, right? Which is actually true, I think, also in a lot of areas of life, including business, right? But yeah, I can tell you that moving from 0 to 1 is basically you don't have the necessary infrastructure around to sustain a new small human being, right? And even though like a whole layer of your nervous system is built just for parenting, right? Still, it needs to come online and you need to kind of just get into that. But we find scaling from there is actually easier than we thought. Just lately, I went to Toronto with my daughter and my wife was at home with the little one, and she said that while it was like a vacation, she got so much done while having only one. She was like, I can't do this. So just some words of encouragement.
Yeah, it's such a treat and such a joy, and I love my family dearly. And it teaches you a lot, and it gives you a lot of information, a lot of data to think about with life in general. But we're excited to bring her into the world. And I've heard similar things. Like everybody says 0 to 1 is the hardest. The one that's more of a toss-up from the conversation I've had is 1 to 2 versus 2 to 3. So for some people, it's like at this point, we've just reached scale. Other people are like, now we're outnumbered. So I think it just depends on the parents and then just, I think the age difference and things of that nature. But then I've heard pretty much unanimously that after 3, it's like easy sailing, because by the time you have 4 or 5, like the first one is mostly self-sufficient at that point. Maybe they're helping with things either around the house or for themselves. And then it's just pretty much the same thing. It's like, well, if you have 5, now 2 is self-sufficient and helping with things and doing. So I've just heard that the 3 is really the peak for many people. And I've seen some studies as well that reference that, but yeah, it's amazing. It's fun.
It is. It is amazing. It is fun. It's the greatest challenge you've ever had, right? So it doesn't matter what you've done before, building businesses, professional sports, you've been deployed in a war zone. Parenting is the most difficult thing. I can tell you that much. But it's true that once you kind of hit scale, it screws in for multiple reasons. One is that, okay, now one of them will be old enough. And then from that point on, you're just basically prepared. It's all about creating the conditions for it. And moving from 2 to 3, this is what I'm hearing too, that's when we need to switch from man-to-man to zone defense, basically. And that's definitely an adjustment. So speaking of man-to-man to zone, I wanted to ask you, I told you that on the podcast, you also started a podcast, right? And it was, what was it about? And then how did that shake out?
So I had a podcast with one of my best friends where I was talking about basketball, and so we called it Court of Opinion. And we on the podcast just talked about current event for basketball, the NBA specifically. And I mean, we did a little bit of college, but it was more about the progression of college into the NBA. And so that was just born out of passion for basketball that he and I shared for our lives. And then additionally, it's always good, I think, to have like an accountability partner for new ventures or new things, because it's really easy to get kicked off the cycle. I read somewhere that most podcasts, I believe it was after like 16 episodes or something like that, fail, or not fail, but like just stop. So I was like, we
Really?
just past episode 16, and I might be butchering the number, but it was something where it was like in the low double digits that you needed to get to in order to, once you're past there, like it's basically become a habit. And so we recorded pretty much 2 seasons. And then after the second season, we just both realized that we were very busy, and it was the way that we were structuring it was much more like a current event podcast. So it was everything that was happening each week. So from a stickiness perspective for audiences, you would need to listen in or tune in every single week. But then, 5 weeks later, unless you were really interested in the Luka and Anthony Davis trade, and that was what we covered on, week 17, that podcast probably didn't have the same evergreen value. So I'm sure if we would have continued with that, we might have talked about or done segments on the arc of Kobe's career, or Kobe versus Michael, or LeBron's legacy compared to MJ, or things of that nature, and done more of evergreen content that could be more episodic or like series based. But just for where we were at in our lives and what else we wanted to do, and the projects we were working on, we just decided that we didn't want to continue with that. But it gave me a rich appreciation for podcasting and a lot of the background work and admin work that is necessary for production. And there are some projects that I'm going to be kicking up soon for more of the data space.
Oh, nice.
That will be podcast based, and I have that experience to lean on so that I can build something great.
Amazing. I'll tune in. And I think the secret ingredient, just from my point of view, is you have to be interested. You really have to be interested in the topics and the people and the stories, right? And then you can get over that hump of, whatever, the 16 episode hump. And speaking of the NBA, we're just releasing this week. We just released it yesterday, but then the posts are coming out this week. An episode I did with Mikal Davis, who is the VP of Strategic Analytics over at Peacock. And she used to work for the Cavs, actually during the time when LeBron came back to the Cavs. And then she left just before they won the championship. Yeah, so she had some cool stories around how at the Cavs they were leveraging data. How do you see, because it's this whole data-driven revolution, the whole AI revolution is impacting everything. Just from your perspective, I'm kind of putting you on the spot there. I don't know if you have any thoughts. That how do you think it will impact professional sports, maybe even more specifically the NBA, in any kind of way that the layperson on the street would not necessarily be privy to?
I think you see it already with overlays on the NBA or the NFL with like next gen stats. So AWS leaning into that. I'm sure other companies will continue to do that. I think as you move to streaming platforms as well, and that is where the sports writ large has gone to, you have all of the rich stats. Like, I think it's ridiculous sometimes when I think it's Elias Sportsboro, when they would post like, this player has scored the most points on Thursdays when having rest on Wednesdays when facing their former team. It's like, yeah, that's an easy stat to like filter down so hard to just get like some nugget where it's like, oh, LeBron James facing the Cavs on a Thursday post Wednesday rest is the best player that has ever played on a Thursday post Wednesday rest against their former team. Like, that's a ridiculous stat line. But when they do show an overlay on the court and say, look, LeBron is most accurate from this part of the floor, or, top of the key on the right side, you're able to, as a, casual fan, look at that and go, oh, that's interesting, and start to dissect potentially like, that is why he keeps driving to the right, or that's why he keeps driving to the right to draw defenders, because they probably are using that same analytics, or their analytics team is generating that. But he is at the same time, it's just a great mind and knows I am great from this spot. So if you don't defend me, I'm going to make it. And if you do defend me, I know you're going to sag off the person who's cutting behind the basket. I'm going to dunk it off or drop it off to them. And then they're just going to slam that home. So I think that's where casual fans, in conjunction with the broadcasters, will create a more rich experience from a data perspective, is because they'll be able to overlay and say, like, Aaron Rodgers has the most deep ball passes for anybody over 40. And this is why a receiver like DK Metcalf in the red zone is so dangerous, because being able to, just throw it up in the air 25 plus yards has eased the pressure from him, when he can just basically cover his eyes, throw that down the field, and then DK's making that catch. And DK playing against one of the best cover corners in the league, and Jalen Ramsey consistently at practice, who he has had beef with in the past. That they're bringing the best out of each other, and they had this best statistical season for a age 28 or age 32-year-old when we look at all age 28 and 32-year-olds, and that's because of their partnership, or that tandem. So that is more of where I see sports going from a just casual fan perspective. I think in terms of actual professionals and their day-to-day, it's going to be more at the computer vision level, as well as I think chemistry is something that will be studied more effectively. So I know that players who post on social media and who are consistently out and who are consistently, basically not taking care of their body from the public perception, this GM or this coach, they do very well with that player. So there's no issue ever with that type of player in the system. But I know this other player would probably not do well being in this city with this coach, because we see historical examples of that player not being able to keep it together. And this city lends itself to people partying, and this coach does not do a great job with vets who don't want to listen. So I think that's something that, understanding those qualitative intangibles in terms of how you build a team or how you construct a team, is where a lot of, at least good organizations, will do their due diligence and research in terms of general player development. So as early as college, being able to survey or understand from coaches, what is the character of this player? Does that character fit into our system? This is where I think of the Thunder, the Spurs, the Heat, in terms of basketball teams that have that rich culture that extends for years and years and years, as opposed to maybe a new team or a team that's consistently in turmoil in terms of hiring, firing their coaches. You probably aren't going to have players who are, don't work in good systems, or might be a stress on culture. They probably won't fit well there.
So that's fascinating that actually we can use data to determine those things. Because when you think about data-drivenness in basketball, I mean, that is just an example. Here behind me, in this book, The Mamba Mentality, Kobe talks about how the only person who was actually put out there as a Kobe stopper was Shane Battier, right? But then, Shane Battier, Kobe says that, well, even he couldn't really stop me. He tried to put his hand in front of my face, but I actually trained both my left and right. It was so wired in that it didn't matter. I wanted to show him that it didn't matter. So I kept scoring. And then I actually looked at an interview by Shane Battier where he acknowledges that, actually, I never really leaned into the whole Kobe stopper thing, because first of all, I knew that if I did, it would just embolden him and motivate him. But also he said that the reason why I was basically framed as the Kobe stopper, because what I used was a data-driven approach. So I just looked at what are some of those areas where he's the weakest, and there were barely any, he says. So he didn't really have a weakness, an Achilles heel, in terms of, if I just get him to do this, he'll stop scoring, or his field score percentage will just go through the floor. But he identified that if I can get him to go this way and score from a specific part of the floor, he will still score most of the time, but it's definitely his statistical lowest, right? So that was all that he did, and it earned him the title, the Kobe stopper, using that data-driven approach. And then obviously there's the coach of the Boston Celtics, Joe Mazzulla, who they won the championship last year, right, in 2024. Am I right about that? I think so.
Yes.
Boston took the trophy, yes, and
Yeah.
he is the data guy in the NBA. So one of his biggest thing was, first of all, just to create the condition for the team to do that thing, and he's more like in a support position for them. So the true posture of servant leadership in a way, but at the same time also just selling the organization on being data driven. So yeah, that's fascinating. And look, our conversation is coming to a close. I think we're already hitting like an hour, and it feels like we barely started. We do like to leave the audience with some actionable nuggets, right? So what we talked about before, like your playbook essentially of being able to capture value through data in an organization. If you had to give your 2 cents to fellow leaders, what would that be? Like what they should focus on? What are those key principles that you think served you well over the years?
Yeah. So for me, it comes down to from acquisition to activation, how you make sense of the data. And, there's a bunch of intermediary steps between there. But from acquisition, meaning all the different sources of data that you have, to activation, how are you actually using it within each of the different operational workflows that you have? That is where I primarily focus. And so if I'm meeting with a executive team or an executive for the first time, it's really me trying to understand from them, what data are they accessing today? What are their enterprise data sources? How are they bringing that into their ecosystem? What's their level of trust within the data, the quality of the data, the completeness of the data? Going through that like general assessment of just, do we have good data, or do we at least, for one of the use cases, have a good narrow set of data? And then mapping that out from, okay, here are the 3 data sources, here is how they tie together, here is, once I have that data, what I do with it. I think many people fail to ask, or many data teams or new data leaders fail to ask, what are you going to do with this? Why do you need this? Why is it valuable? Which is usually because you go to another stakeholder and they'll say, hey, I just want you to build me the report that I've always had. And that's where the conversation ends. And so instead, leaning into, what are you going to do with this? Why are you going to use it? And you'll find out very quickly, well, I take this report, I apply these 3 filters, and then I send that to this group. I take this report, I add a threshold of when something exceeds this KPI, I need it to be sent to the compliance team, or I need this to be sent to the relationship manager so that they can go handle it. You just are able to map out the operational workflows. And at that point, you're now marrying the flow of information to the flow of decisions that are happening within an organization, which is really like marrying the CIO with the COO, which is really the job of a CDO, which the CDO is really a blend between the two. And so if you can do that, and a framework I like to think about is, and I've done this before with like different executive teams, give me every single executive leader you have, every single business unit that you have, if it's a COO, a CFO, a CMO, a CRO, a CIO, a CTO, whatever your C-suite is. And then give me your 3 organizational objectives. So maybe it is that we want to increase top line revenue, or we have a goal of growing through acquisition. Whatever those things that either that C-suite team or the board has agreed upon, like this is our North Star as an organization. This is how we believe that we are going to grow, or this is how we believe that we are going to maintain whatever it is that the organizational objective is. And then for those objectives, with each of those C-level positions, think about, how could I increase revenue? How could I decrease expenses? And how could I avoid costs within each of those different like matrix crossovers? So it's COO with needing to grow through acquisition. Maybe you're thinking about how, for increasing revenue, you can acquire new businesses that are going to improve your overall operation, so that you can leverage your current operation within those new businesses and then take advantage of that revenue without necessarily increasing the overall operational cost. And maybe for reducing expenses, it is trying to implement AI or implement certain automation within each of the different departments that you have, so that you can centralize operations, or at least make operations more efficient, so that if you do just scale the business, or you acquire new customers, that there's not a new cost associated with that, with having more labor. So if you do that for your organization, regardless of whether you are a small enterprise or a global enterprise, you will very quickly get 40 different use cases for each of those different business units, as well as each of the different buckets or categories of basically profitability. And now from there, you can say, well, here are the ones that make the most sense based off the ROI that we receive. And then you start to analyze it from what we talked about earlier, which is what is the business impact? What is the feasibility? What's the time to deliver? What is the overall cost to deliver? Can we make it a more minimum usable product and not actually have something that is so large in terms of an initiative? And by doing that exercise, it removes the subjectivity of the loudest voice in the room coming. Like usually if you work with enough executive teams, like the CMO or the CRO, sometimes the COO, CFO, like they'll be the ones that are able to advocate the hardest in terms of what initiatives should get done. And most of the time they're right, but you'll have a CIO or a CTO that maybe isn't the most persuasive just based off their background, or isn't the one that is going to be the loudest voice in the room, that they have a great idea or maybe the number one idea that should be worked on, but because there isn't that good prioritization framework, it's not. So being able to do that and suss out all the different use cases from a information, and I keep saying information because once you say data, people are like, oh, that's a technical term that I don't want to touch, and that's this person who owns it. It's information at the end of the day. It's observations, it's information. It's using the scientific method to try to test out those hypotheses. But once you have all these use cases and you're able to prioritize effectively, now you have a good roadmap and good marching orders in terms of, okay, here are all the things that we want to get done. Here are all the people that we have right now. We can start to look at demand forecasting or resource allocation to what we have. Do we need to bring on contractors? Do we need to bring on a temporary team because we have the team that could maintain this, but not the team that could implement and build this? So it just gives you a good control center to operate off of from like an enterprise roadmap or plan. And that's what I've been most successful at of working with organizations, is trying to take that more detailed approach of what do we have today? Where are we trying to go? And who are going to be the champions for that? And tying that to exactly what the executives have already approved and what they want to work on, because you immediately have buy-in in terms of this is a sub part of what you've already agreed to. It's just we're taking the focus away from maybe your organization specifically and more so augmenting that to a data-driven approach.
Got it. So where do you see the key bottlenecks with this from your experience? Like where would you advise to pay particular attention, and where are some of those sticking points that you think people should be on the lookout for?
Simply put, ego. Like a lot of people's ego will get in the way in terms of this is my business, this is my company, this is my organization. I've grown this department to whatever this revenue number is, or whatever this, we've grown it from 10 million to 100 million. And the problem with data for many organizations is data provide clarity. They do not provide answers. So if I hold a mirror up and say, here are all the things you did really, really well, and here are some of the decisions you didn't make that were great. That's a really hard thing for people who've built a business and 10x'd it to hear. And it's not to say you were wrong. Like that was terrible that you did that. It's just, if I can successfully work with an executive team and show them that mirror and they say, hey, we agree with this, or this is really interesting, this is really insightful, and we want to lean in on all the ways that we were right and figure out how to, resolve those errors of the past. That is a really exciting and fun place to work at. If you instead go into it and there's just consistent confirmation bias of, oh, I see that those data points support what I already thought, and I see those that over there didn't, I'm going to accept the ones that did and ignore the ones that didn't. That's just a recipe for disaster that maybe happens in 2 years, maybe happens in 5, maybe happens in 10, but it's just burying your head in the sand and not actually taking a data-driven approach. It's you're driving the data at that point, and you're becoming not a data storyteller, a data fiction storyteller.
You don't want to be there for sure.
Yeah. I have one more anecdote because you brought up the cabs. And
sure.
So I was leading a panel discussion with a woman who I believe she was the chief data officer for Rocket Mortgage at the time, and she might still be. And I asked her, what's something we basically talked, and I found out that she worked with Dan Gilbert and worked with him closely. And I said, What's something that Dan taught you that you would take with you, regardless of where you ever go, and would have been valuable for you to know day one at Rocket? She paused for a second and she was like, every single summer for every intern class, Dan will ask the interns at some point, tell me everything that's wrong with my company. And if they bring good ideas, then at the end, he will have them present and he will implement those things. And I just learned that everybody has great ideas. You just have to be willing to listen. And as I think about that, and I gave you the roadblock for most organizations, that is the thing that will revolutionize your business, because your market segment for whatever business you're building can be expansive. You can have mothers and fathers who are buying things for their children, all the way to retirees who are trying to buy things for themselves or trying to buy things for their partners. If you think about the big tech companies and you think about Netflix or Amazon or Facebook or Google, they're profiling everybody from basically birth or birth by proxy of your parent to death. So if you are building your business that is representative of every single market segment, every single different type of consumer or client or customer that you could have, that is how you build something that is sustainable and can fit everybody in the world. And when you have the humility as a multi-billion billionaire who owns labs, who owns this portfolio of companies, and you have some 19, 20, 21-year-old coming in and telling you what's wrong with your business, number one, what do you think you do for that person's career, regardless of whether they work for Rocket or not? You've just given them the agency that they will permanently have to start working somewhere and go, I'm not listening to this person who tells me that I can't do something or can't implement or can't have a good idea, because this guy implemented my idea while I was an intern. And then what if you have a VP or a C-suite executive or a manager at the company who somebody at the organization says, hey, I have a nice idea. And they go, no, you go sit down. You're not allowed to have ideas. I'm the leader here. That person would be escorted out the next day. And so that, I think, is the best example of like a true flat hierarchy or true servant leadership exhibited by somebody who in theory wouldn't have to do that because they have billions and billions of dollars and have started several companies successfully. But I have always remembered that story from her, and I try to tell it to everybody all the time because it's such a great example of what a good leader does, and also just a good data leader as well.
And I think that's actually an excellent point to finish on, because that is a strong anecdote. And I think if you can just adopt that posture, it will solve a lot of your problems downstream and help you capture all these opportunities that these exciting times present us with. So Eric, look, I'm glad we crossed paths. This was super fun. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure our audience will too. This question, like, where can people find you, right? Apart from, LinkedIn, what are you working on right now? And is there anything that you would like to let the audience know about your future plans?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is where I think most people can find me. So I'm on LinkedIn and most platforms with EG Data Guy as the handle. And in terms of what I'm working on right now, so like I mentioned earlier, I do have some exciting things from a content perspective that I will be either picking back up or starting. So be on the lookout for that. And I'll be publishing and posting that on LinkedIn as well as Twitter. And then additionally, just through my company, Omnificity, I provide executive advisory and fractional data leadership. And I've got a couple other things that I'm working on from an advisory perspective in stealth that I'm really excited about and we'll be talking about soon.
Well, we'll stay tuned. Appreciate you coming on the show. And until next time.
I appreciate you as well, Laz. Thank you.